My name is Kushila Kumar. I'm the Sub-Dean Academic Development and Director of the Teaching Academy. And it is my pleasure to be the moderator of this conversation and really to introduce our fabulous guests here and to really take you through a little bit about who they are and then hand over to them for a conversation. So I just want to remind everyone that we are recording this session. And please do also have your mics on mute while the conversation's happening so that, we don't interrupt the students and Professor Brown. But importantly, I want to start this session by acknowledging country. The Division of Learning and Teaching acknowledges the transformative effect of education. Our impact leads to ever-improving educational outcomes, inspiring our students to create a world worth living in. We recognize the inclusive nature of First Nations educational practices and the innovative strategies that have ensured the continuing diversity of lands, waters, and peoples for millennia. We also acknowledge that in our practice, we are guided by the elders, past and present, of the country in which our campuses live: Wiradjuri, Buripai, Gundangara, and Nunabal. In the spirit of Injamara Winanaha, we recognize the depth of First Nations ways of being, ways of knowing, and ways of doing, inspiring our commitment in supporting staff and students in the wisdom of respectfully knowing how to live well in a world worth living in. And on that note, I want to introduce our special guests for today. And we have a few of them. So let me start off by introducing firstly our Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic Professor Graham Brown. So Professor Graham Brown is part of the senior executive team at Charles Sturt University. He oversees the delivery of academic programs, the maintenance of academic standards, provision of learning and teaching support, and the operation of our faculties. Prior to joining CSU, Professor Brown held several leadership roles at the University of Western Australia. He has also held a number of academic and research roles in his native UK. So welcome, Graham. Thank you for joining us today, and we're really looking forward to this conversation with you. Now, on to our students. So Shanae Kutsia, I hope I'm doing justice to your name, Shanae, is an online student enrolled in the Graduate Diploma of Psychology. Shanae's been working as an allied health professional for 16 years. Shanae lives in Queensland and is a mother of 2. KD Gerhard is a third-year medical radiation science student. She's from a small rural community in New South Wales. KD is based at the Wagga campus and has taken both online and on-campus subjects. Katie is also currently on placement. So Katie, we thank you very much for joining us while you're on placement, and we look forward to hearing from you. Next, we have Aaron Thomas. So Aaron is studying a graduate certificate in cloud computing and virtualization, which leads on to a master's degree. Aaron has previously completed a graduate certificate in information technology. Aaron lives in regional New South Wales. Welcome, Aaron. Delighted to have you on the panel. And then we have Brianna. Brianna McGregor is a second-year Bachelor of Physiotherapy student based at the Albury campus. She has completed online and on-campus subjects as part of her study. Brianna is from regional Victoria. And I think, Brianna, you're currently on placement as well. So thank you so much for joining us today, Brianna. We have Brian Sengstock. Dr. Brian Sengstock completed the Graduate Certificate in Intersectionality, Diversity and Inclusion in 2023. Brian is also the Associate Head of School Healthcare Science and a Senior Lecturer in Healthcare Science. Brian is also the Academic Convener and Chair of the Charles Sturt Ally Network. So Brian, we appreciate that you're wearing multiple hats and we want to hear about your multiple perspectives. So thank you for being part of the panel today. Our final panelist, but not our last panelist, is Lauren Bridgefoot. Lauren has just completed her bachelor's degree in equine science at Charles Sturt University. So many congratulations to you, Lauren. Lauren has undertaken both on-campus and online study during her degree. and Lauren is from Queensland. So welcome and thank you for being part of this panel, Lauren. So before I hand over to Graham and the students to have that conversation, I just want to really acknowledge the work of the magnificent work really of Dr. Lou Pemberton. So Lou has been instrumental in orchestrating this panel and this conversation. So I want to thank you, Lou, for everything you've done and all your efforts and contributions in making this a reality. So at this point, I am going to move to the next slide. So you can see here that we've got 3 questions there. And this is a chance for you, Graham, and the students to have a conversation. And we've given you a role, each of you a leading role in one of these questions. So I will hand over to you now to have that conversation.
Thanks, Kushila, and thanks everyone for attending this session. I think this is a really important session for us because, as you know, the higher education sector is going through a whole range of transformations at the moment. You know, we've talked a bit, certainly when I opened, I babbled on a bit about AI, and you know, that's something that's absolutely transforming what we teach, but also how we teach. But also there's broader changes in terms of the sector. The universities are core, which is changing the way in which we are expected to and should be providing support for students from a range of different backgrounds and demographics, and the broader change within the country around skills, not just AI, but other skills needs, the future of work changing, the nature of where we're, the role of universities within that, the relationship with the vet sector, particularly in New South Wales, is something that's really front of mind for the state government and for the feds as well. So there's a whole bunch of transformations going on, and it's really important as we respond to those transformations as a student, as a university, that we keep the student experience, the student needs, and the student learning front and center of our mind in that transformation. So I'm looking at this conversation, and hopefully these questions will just sort of be starting points for a conversation as really sort of some insights for all of us collectively as we excitedly explore all of these opportunities to reflect on how that really makes sure that we still keep the student front and center of everything we do in the learning and teaching experience. And so that's a good segue into our first question, which is really, you know, trying to focus us on, you know, what's good, what's working, and how we can develop and share and build on that. We're looking to understand from our students what the best learning experience or assessment experience you've had in your time at Charles Sturt, and what made them so. And I'm going to handball to Shanae to perhaps start the conversation on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for this opportunity. So for myself, I can really think about one of my topics we covered in biopsychology was neuroscience. What I loved about it is that it had a really interactive approach to the teachings. I also found that the way they delivered the content really addressed various learning styles. So we had audio files, we had tutorials, we had videos, and so forth. So it wasn't just the same kind of, I guess the way that they have actually, delivered the content was very different. We were also really encouraged to identify practical applications to what we were learning. And I found that really interesting because, as you can imagine, neuroscience, very complex to wrap your head around. So really encouraging us to think about practical applications. How does that actually relate in our day-to-day or in our practice? I found that it really enhanced, my retention in particular, and also coming from having previously done health science, that was not how our content was delivered. And so I can say that my results comparatively was far beyond. It was pretty well. So I really enjoyed the way that they've delivered everything in a variety of ways. Thank you.
Thanks, Shanae. That issue of sort of applied learning, I think, is really critical for how we think about assessment and how we think about how AI is changing assessment, the ability to really sort of think about how you apply your learning to the day-to-day context. Katie, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, so I've kind of gone and written a bit of a spiel so I don't forget anything. So just bear with me. So I'm actually a second year studying radiography at Wagga. You guys can hear me properly, right? Okay, fantastic. I'm actually in one of the fluoro rooms at the moment because I didn't have anywhere to go for the meeting, but I'm just going to talk about my favorites and why they worked, and also things that I kind of have a strong opinion on towards the end. So I think overall my favorite assessment type format would be the weekly quizzes. This is found in my topics in first year in BMS 120, which is biomedical science. I believe firmly that by being assessed on something that is fresh in your mind, it really helps to be able to gain your potential. Just because towards the end of the year, you might have forgotten it, doesn't necessarily mean you don't know it. It's just that buildup of stress and burnout as a student that I am definitely feeling right now towards the end of the year. I found them really good to take the pressure off instead of having maybe 2 large exams. Another thing that was similar to this is in my subject MRS 343, which is in image critique and interpretation by Jonathan Hewis, delivered online to us Wagga students from Port Macquarie. This had similar setouts with weekly quizzes, maybe not every week, but usually after a topic, and it would collect all those the whole topic into that question. There were 2 formats. There was a multiple choice or there was a long response. Usually there'd be both for each topic, and it might be like one week A, week B type thing. I found these really good because it is such a content heavy subject and you're looking at multiple regions of the body. Like there are so many bones and so many different pathologies that go with each area of the body. It is very hard to round it up into one massive quiz. So by having one quiz, which is already really hard for us, it helps to keep it fresh and assess what we really do know at that time. And not only that, but you can see progressively throughout the year where you're standing with each topic and where you can improve. One slightly controversial opinion to my peers that I have is I really enjoy case study assessments. I think it's a good opportunity for students, despite how labor intensive they might be. If we're given enough time and a good time of our planned year, they're a really good opportunity to be able to take the chance to study something in depth that we might not have considered. For me, this was about pleural effusions. I did my case study on, and I actually had no idea what they were, but they're such a common pathology. It can help me better understand my patient and better understand their patient pathway, which is really important to me as an aspiring practitioner. My not so favorites, one of my very least favorites are exams that are not open book. I believe the way that the world works online now, that invigilated exams are somewhat useless because people who want to cheat are going to cheat regardless. There's nothing worse than finding out that your peers have cheated when you've put in the hard yards to try and do it without, and they seem to get a better result because they've had a peek or 2 at their notes. This sucks. I think by giving open book exams, like I've seen in the last session for my course, is a really good opportunity to give everyone a playing field, like an equal playing field. By doing so, the students who actually turn up to class, annotate their notes, take in what the lecturers are listening to, compared to the people who just bounce off other students or don't turn up or don't take the time to actually go in depth with what's being said, you're going to see the difference there regardless. Just because it's an open book exam, it does not mean from a student perspective that it's not harder. It does. So I'm personally a person who is querying if I have ADHD, and this is not just because of uni, it's because of a long string of things, and it's kind of just clicked. But for me, I actually go into a really dark time around the time of exams because of the pressure, especially if I know it's a open book, and I've been to doctors, and yeah, it's shown that I go into really high levels of depression, anxiety, and stress because of it. Knowing it's an open book, I'm able to work around that, set myself up better for the exam, and I make sure it actually motivates me more to go to class throughout the year, so it has a better impact overall on my learning for the whole year. So yeah, you're going to see the difference in an open book exam between the student and the student who lacks effort. One last opinion I have on tasks is literature reviews. This was something that myself and a lot of my peers had no idea how to do, despite still doing well in my assessment, I think having a little bit more support from my lecturers on what a literature review actually was would have been nice. I know I know that there are resources out there for students to reach out to, but we didn't really get pointed that way. So we were just kind of like, here, do a literature review and hand it in by however. And this was a very big thing because we had 3 assessments due within 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and it was 10,000, 12,000 words all up, which was a lot for students like myself who have other responsibilities, such as working to support ourselves away from home. Overall, that's kind of my opinion on my favourites assessments and why. The weekly quizzes, because it's fresh in our minds. The open book exams, giving people a equal playing field and giving them a responsibility to show up and make sure their notes are sufficient to carry them. And also case studies, it gives students an opportunity to be able to look into something that they might not have considered before in depth. And your literature reviews, if you're going to give tasks like that, make sure there's support for people who don't know how to do them, because we're definitely out here and not everyone was in a higher grade English class in their high school, or they might not have gone to high school and done a literature review before. So that's kind of my opinion. Sorry, I might have gone a little over time there.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Kitty. It was very helpful. And if I draw what I see as the sort of common theme coming between from what you've said and what Sinead said, it's really, to me, about for us being very clear about why we are assessing the way we are and linking it to the learning outcomes and the skills that you are going to acquire going into the future. So I agree with you that I think closed book invigilated exams have very limited function as a form of assessment. I think there are some, this is a live conversation that I had in my previous institution as well, there are some learning assessments, learning outcomes, where in reality, the only way to assess is in a closed book circumstances. The example I got given very frequently at my previous institution, which had a lot of languages, was language teaching. It's very hard to be able to assess whether somebody has actually been able to, learn the language effectively in a non-invigilated circumstances. But outside of that, when we look at something like weekly quizzes, for us, it's quite challenging, I think, as the Academy to think about this. It's about testing that you understand this, not that you can recall it at whim, as it were. And again, in the modern world, as I think both of you have said, with the internet availability, the reality is that whatever profession you're in, there's very few things that you will have to recall, in that kind of circumstances. So why are we testing in that kind of circumstance rather than that kind of ongoing assurance that you've understood the material? And yes, you might need to do a bit of a refresher every so often, as many of us do. I spend a lot of my life working with the higher education standards framework, and every so often I have to pop in and go, oh yeah, that's right, that's what that standard says, and that's fine. It's how we operate. So I think that's really a common theme, that between what you both said, is making sure that our assessments are relevant to the learning outcome, but also applicable to what you're going to be doing in the future career with your assessments, or rather with your career. Do any of our other students want to add anything positive or negative? We frame this in a positive way, but I think you were right, KD, to also pull out areas where we might want to think about changing practice. Do any of other students want to add to this topic?
No, I did think it was quite interesting, because I do kind of agree with the open book. Like, being able to utilize your resources in a way in the exam is a really important skill. Like, people that like the closed book exam, people that do cheat, they don't fully understand it. So I feel like open book exams allow you to actually kind of express how much you do understand. Like, you might have a surface level, but if you turn up to lectures, you turned up and your notes are all there, you have a deeper understanding, so you can express that easier. I'm not sure if that really makes sense, but that's what I kind of got from it, and I think it's quite beneficial as well. But yeah.
And I think a large part of it, again, Katie, that link between open book versus closed book in terms of background, and it's, to me, it's not just about particular conditions like ADHD, which obviously are place extra stress on people around exam periods, but also the whole background that students have had. So again, my previous institution was a GO8 where, the majority of our students came from, a small number of private schools within about, 500 meters of the campus itself, and they had been drilled since probably year 7, 8 in how to write an essay, how to do a lit review, but the reality of Charles Sturt is that's not the student body we serve, and we're proud of the fact that as a university, we provide opportunities, educational opportunities, to a much more diverse range of students with much more different backgrounds and different educational trajectories than the GO8s typically do. Sorry, for the students who don't know, the GO8 is the research intensive 8 universities, so your Sydney's, Monash, Melbourne, and things like that. And we're proud of that, but that also means we need to make sure that the way in which we assess and the presumption of knowledge coming into the university and presumption of skills coming into the university is different, not through a lack of ability on your part, but a lack of opportunity on your part to develop those skills. Okay, shall we move on?
I will do you mind if I just, add
Yes.
to that, just because we're on that topic? Again, just with regards to my biopsych course, I found it really interesting. I know a lot of the students may not have appreciated it, but one of our assessments was actually it was a setting where we were essentially being on a podcast, and we had an assessor who would ask us, particular questions regarding the content. So it just really allowed us to show and demonstrate our understanding of the concept. So it wasn't just like you saying a closed book exam where we had to, it can be quite black and white. In this kind of conversation assessment, we were able to really express our understanding. And if we kind of got stuck a little bit here and there, our assessor would kind of give us a little prompt. So it really allowed us to, calm our nerves and to understand some of the concepts and show that, and demonstrate our understanding.
Yeah, so that's really good, Sinead. And I think oral assessment in the world of massive challenges to academic integrity is a really really important thing for us to be looking at and thinking about, because it's, first of all, it allows students to respond in a way that best suits them, basically. So allows that conversational element to explore whether or not somebody has got the capacity and the understanding that we want. But also it's a really strong protection against academic integrity breaches to have that oral assessment. The challenge for us as an institution, and this is a lot of the challenge in the assessment space, is the cost of it. Because if we were to imagine, let's take one of our really big courses like nursing, so we have sort of not oral assessments, but practical assessment, OSCEs, in most of our, in many of our medical programs, including nursing. And the cost of administering those is huge. And this is not me being a tight ass, right? This is me ultimately how we allocate the money that you give us and that the government gives us to teach you. That's our revenue. So every dollar that we spend on assessment is a dollar that we can't spend on the actual delivery of the teaching. So finding that right balance between responsive and appropriate assessment practices with the cost of it is a real challenge for us. Within that context, I might throw to you guys a bit of a curveball, which is something that I raised in our introduction. So I'm really interested in having a conversation about the idea of optional assessments and imagining an assessment regime where, so for many of our students, university is instrumental. And what I mean by that is that people come to university because they want a job, right? They want to be a nurse or they want to be a teacher, and they are getting the qualification that they that takes them on the way. Historically, some academics, particularly I think in again those sort of posh GO8 universities, have tended to be a little bit a little bit condescending towards that kind of approach, and they think that people should go to university to have their mind blown and the love of learning. My view on that always is that's our job to inspire that in you, not to expect it of you as students. But for those students who for whom university is entirely validly an instrumental pathway to an outcome, could we imagine a different assessment regime which might actually be more similar to the way that TAFE assesses? So if you, for those, some of you maybe have come through the TAFE pathway, where, you know, assessment is typically competency based and it's pass fail. So you're not having to compete for a high distinction if you choose not to. You're not having to compete for those grades. It's simply, you know, the kind of the means to the end to get the credential, which will then allow you to practice in the field you want. Is that something that would be widely popular amongst the student body, do you think?
I'm just going to add my morning mantra at the moment is P's get degrees. So maybe, but also as someone who's highly driven by putting pressure on myself to perform well, having the high distinction, I aim for the high distinction, but I might not always get there. That's, if that helps at all.
So in my sort of model in my mind, which may be completely unfeasible to be clear, you would have the option, if that's what you want, and for somebody who's thinking perhaps about an honours and perhaps about, you know, going on to a master's, you know, they would inevitably have to choose the sort of the graded pathway through the assessment structure. But for those people for whom, you know, they just, you know, it's just, I want to be a nurse, that's what I want to do. I'm taking the example of nursing because it's our biggest degree, I should say, not because it's you know, one that's particularly suitable for this. You know, would that be an assessment pathway that was saying, I don't actually want to compete for those HDs. I just want to assure myself and assure the university and ultimately assure after the regulator that I am competent to perform as a nurse. P's gets degrees is a good kind of phrase, I think, in the sense that it's that yes, absolutely, P's do get degrees, and that's fine, and that should be something that's really valuable for many students and not seen as, you know, somehow a failure because it's a P. Yes, Neil.
I actually love this question. Sorry, I keep talking. I love this question because it's a bit layered for myself. So I think it would depend on the industry or the discipline that you're going to. So with myself, you know, going for psychology, it's actually the eligibility. We have to hit those high distinctions. It's so competitive that we've got no choice. So yes, of course, for us, it'd be nice to just get the P's, but we can't because it's such a competitive industry. I can speak from experience. You know, obviously, as I mentioned before, I studied, so I did Bachelor of Health. I'm a podiatrist for 16 years. And what I've found, and as a mother, it's shifted my perspective over the years, because when I studied, I was obviously younger. Back then, sorry, my phone. Sorry, guys. Back then, I really did, you know, I pushed for the higher marks. And all that sort of stuff. I put myself under a lot of stress. What I found, though, is that your grades are not indicative of the type of clinician or professional that you're going to be. You know, I may not have been extremely great at my, like, academically at uni, but I really found when I was in practice, you learn so much more when you're in the field and in practice, that I became an exceptional clinician through, you know, like I said, being hands-on. So I kind of feel like sometimes our academic schooling can be quite harsh. And like I said, I've got 2 girls. So I always try and encourage them that don't put yourself down because of a grade. You can grow and you can evolve over time.
My son's high school, which was a sort of a public school, but in a relatively wealthy part of Perth. So, you know, had all the sort of relatively wealthy people going there. Their slogan as a school was more than marks. And it was fantastic. You know, the whole mantra was, yeah, your ATAR is important, but that's not what we're here for. It's more than marks. Okay, we've had a long chat on that topic, and we probably better move on in the interest of time. So the next sort of broad topic we wanted to address is around this issue of student vibrancy and belonging and connection, which is something that, you know, online students often we struggle to support online students in that space in particular, as a lot of universities do, but also coming out of the period of COVID, and many of our students will have completed their schooling with extended periods of homeschooling and isolation. You know, is a real challenge, I think, particularly at this point in time, for sort of many people coming into university. So we were really interested to hear from you about the kind of activities that enabled you to really meaningfully connect with your peers and to learn better through those experiences. And I'm going to pass this one over to Brianna in the first instance.
Howdy, hello. I just want to say quickly, I am on middle of placement, and if you hear any background noise, that's just people doing their thing. But all the doors are closed, so it's all good. So I am a second year physio student, and we did a task this year called interprofessional practice. Essentially, we underwent a few workshops where we were given a client with a very broad problem list, and as a physio student, we went along and did our physio thing. So we took notes and we tried to figure out what's best for them. And while we were doing that, other specialties like occupational therapy and podiatry students also worked on the patient in their own time. And what was really cool after that, we actually all got together in like a group and we discussed the patient. And it was really interesting to see how different specialties actually approached this problem. So they all had their like specialty, like the OTs looked more at their home environment and the equipment they're using, whereas us physios, we looked at their mobility and the safety to actually walk around. And it was really interesting to see how it actually all came together. And that's really been really important for me, especially now in placement. I'm seeing how we all work together, because beforehand, I never realized how important a healthcare team was. So this really enabled me to connect and be more passionate about how I approach my patients holistically. And after all this, we then conducted what we call a handover. So once again, we got into these groups and we communicated together to make leaders. We had a scribe that would write notes, and we all essentially learnt how to communicate and work together as a team to produce the best outcome for this client. And yeah, so overall, getting these different perspectives was really interesting, and it definitely implemented what I've learned in theory, and I was able to apply that to these practical scenarios, which is really beneficial and has definitely made me more excited to become a physio, being able to work in these teams of health professionals. So yeah.
Thanks, Brianna. And I think, again, really common theme coming through that from Shanae and Katie earlier around real life application, that, you know, the learning the theory, I guess, in physio, you're probably spending a lot of time looking at diagrams of knee joints and things like that, but then actually, you know, learning in a way that actually how you will do this in real life, both learning and assessment. I think that's a really common theme that we're seeing coming through the responses. Aaron, what's your perspective on this one?
Yeah, so I'm sort of similar in terms of I guess one of the subjects, I think it was one of the first ones I did in more recent years, did a standard sort of group assignment, which I've always been a fan of, depending on what the assignment is and how it's structured. And it was quite good because we all had our own sort of parts to play, but you didn't have the worry about you know, the performance of your peers affecting your mark, which is a bonus. But that sort of group work actually extended through the whole subject. So it sort of helped as part of this group. I think there was 4 of us. We got to sort of learn what each member's weaknesses are. And so if there's an area where I had a bit of a knowledge gap, well, I could feed off the other members of the team to try and build that knowledge, which is not something I'd necessarily get from doing a sort of more traditional subject where it would be around sort of, you know, research and textbook based. So that's something that I really enjoyed in one of my more recent subjects, one of my earlier subjects. But going on to one of my more recent subjects, I really enjoyed, it had a structure around, well, all of the assignments sort of built upon one another and were based around real world scenarios, which I loved, because it also related to my job as well, so which was good. But they incorporated that with sort of lab work and simulations that I would do in my workplace, and that relate to the course that I'm studying, which I really liked, because I have a lot of trouble with sort of memory. So doing sort of a closed book exam or more rote learning style, it doesn't work for me because I won't be able to remember it. But if you spoke with me, or I would be able to say a lot more that way than I could sort of in a standard sort of setting. So doing it that way, I really enjoyed, because it helped not only embed what I was learning a lot nicer, but gave me the opportunities to sort of explore. Because within the simulations they also had sort of an open one, which was, you know, go nuts, do what you want, see what you can do in this particular system. And I really enjoyed that, because that's how I learn. But yeah, aside from that, the other things I sort of liked were the weekly quizzes, and trying to get the forum discussions going within the subjects is helpful, but it can be hit and miss, because it just depends on the group of people you get for each subject. You can't necessarily rely on that as a form, but if you do get a group of people that are more vocal, it is really good, I found.
That issue of teamwork in group assessment is a really interesting, again, a really tricky one for universities across the country, I think, because you know, in terms of generic skills, teamwork is absolutely critical to virtually every workplace you're going to go into, whether medical, whether, you know, legal, whatever workplace. You know, teamwork is critical. It's also, we know from, you know, engagement with employers, something that employers often feel that graduates are lacking. Again, not just from Charles Sturt, but across the sector. It's a common theme in university engagement with employers in terms of what they want out of our students is, you know, better team skills. And the QUILT survey, the government student experience survey, which some of you may have filled in, and you may be asked to. It's a nationwide survey where the government samples a proportion of students. You know, again, there's specific questions around teamwork in there, and again, across the sector, it's one of the students. They have a whole set of questions around different skills and whether you develop these skills. And across the sector, it's typically one of the lowest areas that students rate. Is teamwork. So there's a clear need for teamwork, and yet group assessment is really, really unpopular with the majority of students. Now, you've presented a different view on that, but it's a really interesting challenge for us, again, is how we really support the development of those teamwork skills, but with, and find ways to assess it, which are you know, students can see the learning, understand the learning, but also feel like they're getting the mark they deserve, not the average of the mark within the group, which is often the sense. Erin Rose, you wanted to make a comment here?
Yeah, sorry. It just reminded me, so by chance the other day I went to a Newcastle University NU racing team event. So that's mostly their engineering teams. I don't believe we have an engineering degree at Charles Sturt, but I could be wrong. But do we? Okay.
Yes.
I didn't. Someone told me the other day that we didn't, so I correct
we
that.
only teach civil engineering, but we do.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So anyway, the NU racing team, they build a car every year and a rocket. And I think they're actually starting a brewing project. But so I just went with another alumni that was part of the racing team previously. And there was such a great sense of community there. So the students, there was a presentation, students were all individually acknowledged and, you know, received awards. And then there was catering, and also the students had their project posters all around the room. And so after the presentation, you know, family, friends, alumni, industry partners who had partly funded the projects were able to go around and ask students, you know, questions about their assessment item or the thing they built or the thing they worked on. And, you know, sometimes complex questions, sometimes just questions out of curiosity. And you could tell there was such a great atmosphere, and it created also really good opportunities for students around employability. So I think, you know, that kind of assessment stuff and, you know, and partnerships with community could really help create more of a student atmosphere, like team building atmosphere, if that makes sense.
I think that's really,
I'm not in engineering at all, and I was really excited around the atmosphere of the event. It felt it was really good. It was really inspiring.
That's a really helpful suggestion, and I think and we'll definitely, Kushila, I hope we're taking notes, because I think that's something worth exploring, and particularly how we do it with work.
Just not sure how it would translate into sort of online study for students completing online projects.
Well, that's the challenge that we'll throw to the Teaching Academy to work out how to do that. This is a really interesting conversation, but I am going to have to move us on in the interest of time to our third question. Again, this is sort of just a lot of what we've talked about has been, you know, studying, assessment, but also that transition into university. So the question we're asking, the last question is what tips for success would you give to somebody starting out at Charles Sturt University? And we're going to start with somebody who's knows this question from both sides as an educator and a learner. Brian, over to you.
Thanks, Graham. And I particularly like your comment earlier that it's more than just marks. I was reflecting at the start of the session on some advice I was given about 27, 28 years ago as an online, or then a distance student, which we now call online. And at orientation, we were basically told just focus on the assessment tasks. That's what you're being assessed on. That's all you need to achieve as part of your university studies. And I think from both sides of the fence, as both an educator and as a student, that advice is not good advice to students, because if you just focus on the assessment tasks and you just complete the assessment tasks, you're essentially missing so much of that learning that you could be undertaking. And as we know, essentially we're in a situation where we're lifelong learners. We never know everything. So we should be engaging with lifelong learning throughout university. I think one of the other key things for students coming in is there are no stupid questions. None of us know everything. I started my academic career as a student over 30 years ago. Technology has changed so significantly. And I guess from my perspective as an educator, I see students struggle with technology through no fault of their own. They might not have that understanding. So having that confidence to reach out to the academics and ask how to use a particular piece of technology if you don't understand it. Engaging with the social aspects of university. University is more than just about getting an education. It's about engaging with the community, engaging with that social aspect of learning as well. I think it was Katie mentioned earlier as well about resources and not understanding how to do a literature review. And I think that's important coming into university as well. As I mentioned earlier, we don't know everything, but we also don't know where those resources are. The resources we can access, both academic and non-academic resources. My particular area, and I've just completed the grad cert, intersectionality, diversity and inclusion, and my particular research interest is in that space. And the key thing that I see repeatedly is particularly our sexually and gender diverse students feeling as though they're invisible in the curriculum, invisible in the university. We're working on that and we're making some inroads there, but there's still a whole lot that we could do in that space to make, I guess, universities more accepting for diversity generally. I'm just also conscious all the time, Graham, so I'll finish there.
Oh, thanks, Brian. Very, very provocative and helpful. So I think then let's throw over to Lauren to give us her perspective on this.
Hi. So I've got just a couple of things that I kind of thought about with this. So I'm quite an introverted student. So starting at university was very overwhelming. So if I could talk to past me, there would be so many things that I would tell her. Probably the first one is to give everything a go. So anything that looks mildly interesting, looks like something you may want to do, but you don't know, just give it a go anyway, because you never know when you're going to find your thing if you don't have your thing already. So I come from a degree that has a very broad range of topics, so it doesn't have a set outcome. And so I didn't really know kind of what I was going to end up doing. And by just giving everything a go and trying different things I maybe didn't consider, I'd found things that I really love. So that's just a really big one for me, is just try new things, basically. And then following on from that, talking to people, talk to your lecturers, talk to your peers, talk to surrounding staff at the university, you never know what you're going to learn. You never know what opportunities you're going to be presented. You never know what connections they're going to have. You just never know who you're going to talk to. I've talked to so many amazing people throughout my 3-year degree, and I can't believe the people I've met and the connections I've made and where those connections have led me, which leads on to my final and really big one, is take every opportunity that's presented to you. You just never know where they're going to go. I am on this panel because I've managed to talk to people and I was invited, and it's just a really cool opportunity that I've been presented. And I said, sure, I'll give it a crack. I'll come and do something different. I've also been given opportunities to be on a committee for equine science, which is just amazing. And I just never would have had those things if I hadn't have gone and talked to people and just said, okay, I'm going to give that a go, because I am just inherently not someone that would do that. So it's been a very big learning thing for me to just be like, you know what, I'm going to give that a go, because I don't know where that's going to take me. And so just, really trying new things, taking opportunities, because you may find your thing. And I now have found my thing, which hopefully will be education. So it's very exciting for me.
Thanks, Lauren. So what I find really interesting in what you said there is that you're kind of recognizing and pulling out a little bit of a tension between, on the one hand, and again, I think this has been a thing that we've talked about a lot, making sure that we have flexible modes of study, which, and I don't mean online versus in person, I mean flexible ways of assessing and learning, so that we make sure we cater for people from different backgrounds, demographic or whatever, but also different styles of learning, and different contexts in which people find themselves, whether ADHD or something like that. But at the same time, what you have also done is put yourself outside of your comfort area and said, okay, I'm naturally an introvert. I'm not, but and I think, again, there's a balance we have to find there, because, we do need to make sure that we provide, that we don't just assume that, everybody performs well in exams, and so that's the sort of old ways of doing things, right? That we cater for all forms of diversity in learning and assessment, but at the same time, we do need to be, I think, it's part of our role as a university just to challenge people to move outside of their comfort area, and maybe try doing things a bit differently. And I think you picked that really up nicely in your experience. Do any of our other students have anything to contribute on that?
Sorry, can I just add one more thing?
Yeah.
So as a student from a really regional and rural town, moving away from home from uni is a really big thing. And this is sort of on that last question. For me, scholarships, they are amazing, and I always advocate people to go for them. I didn't quite get the ATAR for this one, so I referred a friend who did, and she got $10,000 just for being the only person who applied. So I think it's really important for not only regional and remote students who want to go further in education. Maybe they want to go do ag and come back to the family farm, or maybe they're like me and want to go get a job and leave the town, or maybe come back eventually once they're qualified. But scholarships help give people an opportunity where they don't so much have one. And I know this isn't quite on theme, but that's what really helped me leave my community, so maybe I can come back one day and help better it. So that's one small thing that definitely helped to set me up for uni. Yeah.
No, I think that's really, Katie, that's really important. And to me, what's a reminder for us, particularly as a regional university, is the logistical cost of studying, right? Both financial and time and emotionally, which we have to be very cognizant of. The challenge with us, since I've been here, we've really redirected a lot of our discretionary spend towards scholarships for precisely the kinds of reasons you're talking about. And there's obviously many external scholarships. The reality is that this is all just a drop in the ocean of what is actually needed to support students, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds and from regional areas, to study effectively. Luckily for us, I think this is because we simply don't have the resources to address it, right, as a university. But luckily, this is a conversation that's very live, both across the media, particularly around placements. Many of you may have seen this, but there's this phrase that the media is now using, which I actually like, placement poverty, which is really, a real issue, but also more generally in terms of the logistics and the whole higher education sector is undergoing a review at the moment with the feds having set up what's called the University Accord as a sort of process. I'm sure you may have read about some of it in the media, but that's really a live issue for them, is understanding the logistical support. So it shouldn't have to be scholarships, is my crude view. But scholarships are great for those students who get them, but ultimately we need to have a fairer and better way to support students, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds. One of the people on that panel, Fiona Nash, actually a former colleague of ours as an academic here, but she's the government's regional education commissioner. So she is really focused on this, and we can be sure, I think, that there will be something positive coming out of this for students. What it will be, we don't really know yet. So do any of our students have any last thoughts on any of those questions?
Just building on, I guess, what Katie and some of the other colleagues have said. One of the things I struggled with, I guess initially with uni, like this is the second course that I'll hopefully finish, but the first few I struggled with. I've got ADD and OCD, and I didn't actually have much awareness of what support services were available and how they could support me. And it's only actually since finding out about that I've been able to actually finish a degree. So that's something, I guess, that I'd like to highlight, that the awareness for me wasn't there. I think it's getting better because that's how I came across it, but it's certainly something I think that could help with future students, knowing what support's available and how it can help them.
That's really a good point, Aaron, and I think it's something that we have been aware of, that historically we've had, we think, pretty good support services for students, but haven't necessarily communicated those in a consistent way. As hopefully you all know, we are transitioning to a new LMS, a new version of Interact 2 next year. And one of the things we are looking at is how we can use that as a kind of single portal, so that students don't have to go off looking through multiple different sites, but also using AI. This is an area where we can actually use AI to look at student behavior and actually just very gently prompt. So when we see disengagement, for instance, the AI can actually, through the LMS, actually say, have you thought about this kind of support? Have you thought about that kind of support? So that we're really sort of tailoring support to students, as well as, being much clearer about where and how to get it.
I'll just add a very quick one, sorry. Just for me, it would be, preparation is key. I know we hear that a lot, but I get, a lot of the online students, obviously we're studying online for a reason. We've got our work obligations and family. For myself, that is absolutely key. Before I start a semester or a session, I sit down with a calendar for that next 3 months, and I literally have to plan everything. There's school holidays that I put down. There's, I'm in a senior management position, so I'm pulled all sorts of places. So it's really important to familiarize yourself with your subject outline. I usually sit down with that, and also plan my assessments way ahead of time. I don't wait before, we get that 4 weeks to do a written assessment. I have to plan it ahead because I have to drip feed my time. So I think that's very important.
Absolutely. And developing tools to assist students in that planning, I think, is something that we could really be focusing on as well. So yeah. Okay, look, for me, that's been a really interesting and helpful discussion. I hope it has been for you. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Kushila, maybe next year we need a little bit longer session for this, because I think we could have kept going much longer than we have done today. Certainly I think there's a lot for us to take away and think about there and respond to as we roll out our education strategy next year. But Kushila, I think I'll pass back to you to wrap up the
Wonderful.
session.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Graham. And thank you so much to our students. I think please join me in applauding them, because you have so honestly and authentically shared your lived experience, your perspective. And, you know, there's been so much that you've shared with us today, that there's so much to take back to our places where we teach, the places where we learn, the places where we support staff and students, and think about what you've been saying. So my gratitude to you, to being part of this experience and to coming along and sharing with us. So honestly, you are amazing ambassadors for learning and amazing ambassadors for Charles Sturt University. So thank you so much. And to Graham, you know, you just, what an amazing conversation. Thank you for the curveball question, which I think also got us talking. You know, it got us thinking a little bit about what might assessment look like if we were to do it differently, if we dared to do it differently. So I think that was really fun to be part of this discussion. I agree with you. I could have kept doing this all afternoon and listening into this conversation. So next year we might need to put a couple of hours aside potentially for something like this. But thank you very much, everyone, for the participants, for the audience here who've been listening in, who've been adding to the chat. I can see lots of commentary there. Unfortunately, we don't have a time for Q&A, but I think you'll agree with me that there's lots of learning points for us to take home. So this brings us to the end of day 2 for Charles Sturt EdX. I think we've had a fantastic day so far. We've had a fantastic keynote speaker. We got to see Brightspace and learn that Brightspace will help us do things fast. I think that's the message I took away from the session today, that there's so many amazing features that's just going to help us as academics, but also help you as students. And I think Shanae, Brian, Lauren, and Aaron, Brianna, and Katie, you know, you shared with us the importance of kind of making those supports visible, you know, making sure that your learning was scaffolded in certain ways. And so I'm hoping, again, our new learning management system gives us the tools and some of those affordances to address some of the things that you've been saying here today. So everyone, thank you for being part of the day today. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. If you can come back along, because we're going to do some celebrating of our teaching award winners tomorrow morning. So we look forward to seeing you at that session. But for now, take care and thank you very much.